So may I ask if you have ever experienced a time in your life when you were convinced that God was about to answer an important prayer in this big, miraculous way, but then suddenly everything shifted. And it felt almost as if the rug was pulled out from underneath of you. The promotion the boss had mentioned you might get was given to someone else. The offer you put on the house was outbid. The relief that the doctor described with this new prescription never came. The life that was supposed to come out of rehab, that transformed life, never occurred. The restoration of brokenness that the counselor had offered never took root. Assuming that something was about to happen and then it all falls to the ground. That's kind of the place where we find a very desperate father this morning named Jairus in our passage today. If you were here with us last Sunday, we were actually introduced to Jairus because his story started and then it stopped. He came to Jesus asking for healing for his dying 12-year-old daughter when a woman reached out to Jesus who had been sick for 12 years and found healing. And just as Jairus was excited that Jesus was going to head back to his house again now that this woman's event was over, he received news that his daughter had died. And what we're going to talk about today is more than just about what happened to Jairus, but it's about how Jesus meets each of us when our faith is shaken and when we kind of feel like the story is over. And as we walk through the passage today, I just really want to invite you to see it not just as a story that took place long ago, but that is a picture of what Jesus is still doing today. Because here's the reality. Jesus doesn't always come when we expect, but he always brings what we need. We get a little bit worried about the timing. He's primarily worried about what we need most. So we're going to back up in our story and reread what we finished last week because Jairus' story starts, stops, and then picks up again. So we're going to read it from the beginning. So if you were with us last week, this will sound familiar. If not, that's great. Mark chapter 5, verse number 21 says this: When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped and she felt in her body that she was freed from suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding around you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." Now we covered all of that last Sunday. This woman came in faith to Jesus, believing he had healing in his wings. And when she touched him, she was immediately healed. And not only her body, but her relationship and her soul was saved. And Jairus had a front row seat for her story. But now let's get back to Jairus' story, verse 35. While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" So if you just pause and think about what just happened, right? Jesus had agreed to come to Jairus' house to heal his daughter. While they were on their way, a woman sick for 12 years, reached out to touch Jesus, and she was instantly healed. Like, and think about that. Like, wow, Jairus said, this is exactly what I want for my daughter. So immediately his faith must have been increased when the healing happened. But as soon as his mind was processing that, messengers from his own home said, there's no need to bring him. Your daughter has died. Like, could you imagine the emotional whiplash? You go from hope to heartbreak in like just a matter of seconds. And I wonder, do you think he felt resentment to the woman that she stopped Jesus? Do you think he got angry with Jesus for stopping to help the woman? Could he be thinking, if Jesus hadn't stopped, my daughter wouldn't have died? And I wonder, sometimes, we have those same types of thoughts where we start to ask, man, is Jesus helping someone else at my expense? Have you ever noticed someone else's marriage finds restoration while yours is still broken? Have you ever watched someone's child come back while yours drifted further away? Have you ever had someone else's needs miraculously provided and you're like, I can't even pay the light bill? And it's in moments like this when we question God's priorities. Like, why are you so quick to help them and so slow to help us? And then the thoughts begin like, does God even see me? Does he even care? Does he find other people more deserving than me? But I want to ask you today, what if the delay to your request isn't a dismissal? What if he's not saying no to you? What if he's saying not yet? And what if in the waiting, Jesus is doing something deeper? He's not punishing you. He's preparing you. He's not ignoring your pain. He's actually building your faith. He's not stealing your joy. He's getting ready to give you life for something you have no idea that lies ahead. See, Jairus didn't know it yet, but his delay was not the end of his story. We're not there yet, but it's not the end of his story. And I just want to encourage you, a delay in your life, a delay to an answered prayer, a delay to a need being finally met, it doesn't mean the end of your story. Now, the messengers that brought the news to Jairus, they assumed it was over because they said, don't even bother bringing him. The daughter is dead. There's no need for him to come now. But Jesus overheard them, and Jesus knew the story wasn't finished. Look at verse 36. Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, don't be afraid. Just believe. In the Gospel of Luke, as you see behind me in the Gospel of Luke, there's actually an added phrase. Don't be afraid, just believe, and she will be healed. So Jesus doesn't let the moment linger, right? As soon as he receives devastating news, Jesus speaks directly to him. He cuts through his grief, he cuts through his fear, and he gives him words of reassurance and power. In fact, you got to see this. He actually uses Jairus' own words to speak his faith into him. Because we saw in Luke 50 that Jesus had said, don't be afraid, just believe, and she will be healed. Well, very early when we read it very early, when Jairus comes to Jesus, he says, come, lay your hands on my daughter and she will be healed. He had faith in that moment, and Jesus was speaking his faith back to him. And so here's the picture that's starting to form as we go through this portion. That Jairus, and maybe you, Jairus had faith in Jesus for healing, but not for resurrection. Like, he knew Jesus could heal the sick, but his daughter's not sick anymore. She's dead. So it's over. And yet Jesus says, keep believing. because your circumstances may have changed, but I haven't. I just love that. It actually reminds me of what Jesus, how he responded to his disciples when they were in that storm. And as we just read a couple of weeks ago, they were in that storm. And Jesus says, why are you afraid? It's like his way of saying, don't you know who I am? The winds and waves obey me. And in so many words, he's saying to Jairus, don't you know who I am? Just believe. And I'm guessing there's someone here today who may have walked in that just needs to be reminded of this truth. Even when circumstances change, Jesus doesn't. Like it may look like things are getting worse instead of better, but listen, we can still trust him with our lives because not only can Jesus give healing, but he can bring things that were dead back to life. Was there a time in your life when you believed God had a specific plan for you? For your marriage, for your kids, for this calling of your life, and now, man, life is just taking you on a very different path than what you assumed, and maybe you've been hurt, experienced betrayal or loss that you never would have seen coming, and in your heart, you feel like, well, he could have done this a long time ago, but now that I'm here, Jesus is really just too late. Have you started asking if that portion of your story is over? And if so, I really want to encourage you. Jesus is whispering to us all, don't be afraid. You know who I am. Stay with me. Just stay with me because your circumstances have changed, but I haven't. Think of verse number 37. Let's go on. It says he did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. Now, I just want to pause here for a moment. That's so weird, isn't it? He's got this large crowd. He's got this group of unbelievers who just came and said, your daughter's dead, don't even bother. He can do all he's got to do is say, y'all follow me. I'll show you who I am. And he doesn't. He chooses 3. Because here's what we have to understand as we're reading the Gospels. Jesus making a major shift in his ministry. Up until this point, Jesus would go into a town and he would heal everyone. He welcomed the entire village. He would perform signs and miracles, all of them saying the Messiah is here. But we've read what the response of the religious leaders was. And it wasn't faith, it was rejection. They accused him of doing his work by Satan's power. And so the purpose of his miracles is begun to change. You're not going to see Jesus doing mass healings anymore. He's already done that because he wanted to show who he is. Now his miracles are one of 2 categories. He is either training and teaching the faith of his disciples, or he is responding to the faith of individuals. And in this case, he's doing both. He's going to respond to Jairus' faith, and he's going to bring a few of his disciples with him. And you say, well, why only 3? We don't think this way, but Jewish law required 2 or 3 witnesses for something to be confirmed. Well, we're reading something that was witnessed by 3 of Jesus' disciples. Not all of them, just 3 of them, because it needed to be confirmed that it actually happened the way that it was written. And we're actually getting to study this moment in our scriptures because there's 3 that got to see it. Let's keep reading though in verse 38. It says, when they, came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead but asleep." But they laughed at him. Again, I'm going to pause here in the middle of verse 40, right? So I'll admit, like, when I read what Jesus said, it doesn't make sense to me. Why would Jesus respond this way? Because here's the thing. This kind of mourning was normal. For us, when we go into a funeral home, everybody's very quiet. In this day, they would hire people to mourn and play music because it would allow the grief of the individuals who lost someone, it would allow them to express their grief loudly. They didn't have to hide it. And so this was very normal. And yet when Jesus walks in, he's kind of like, why is everybody crying? Well, we know why everybody's crying, because this girl has died. But the question, which seems so out of touch, is just like the question he asked in the boat. And just like the question he asked in the boat, like, why are you afraid? Well, because there's a storm around us. And just like when he was in a crowd and he asks, who touched me? And like the disciples have to be thinking, you ask the most ridiculous questions. We're afraid because there's a storm. When you were crowded by people, you said, who touched me? Why do you ask these types of questions? But see, they didn't know what Jesus knew. He knew someone had touched him and power had gone out. So now he's saying, why are you crying? And I wonder if the disciples are like, he's asked these kinds of strange questions before. What does he know that we don't? And I don't want us to pretend that we would have had it figured out, right? We would have been there laughing at Jesus. We would have been laughing at Jesus with everybody else had we been present. But let's keep reading in verse 40. It says, after he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother, the one who expressed faith, and the disciples to help their faith. The disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, Talitha koam, which means little girl, I say, get up. Immediately, the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. Right? This is just wild. You read this. But we have to understand what's happening here. Who is Jesus? He's the creator. And so every atom and molecule responds to the voice of its creator. So when Jesus looks at this little girl and says, get up, every atom and molecule in her body said, yes, sir, you are our creator. We will do whatever you ask. And she stood up and she began to walk around, leaving everyone completely astonished, right? And us too, had we been there. And then I just love that Jesus cares about this girl enough to give her something to eat. And nobody else is really thinking of that. But then he goes on and he tells them, don't tell anyone. Because Jesus is no longer seeking to prove himself to the Jewish nation. He knows the religious leaders are plotting against him. And this would just add to the fuel. So he's leaving the timing of their confrontation and of his suffering into the hands of the Father. Like he knows his hour is coming. But it's not yet. Okay. So we just finished an incredible story here in Mark 5. We get to the end of this chapter, and we see these elements in Jairus' life: fear, faith, delay. And I think for us as Western Christians, immediately we're like, well, what do we apply to our lives? And I think we should look for those moments. But before we do, I want us to ask ourselves a question. Why is Jairus' story interrupted? It starts, and then it stops, and then it finishes. There's very few moments in Jesus' life, very few of the times where Jesus does something like this, where there's a start, a stop, and then a finish. And I wonder, I'm just going to ask us to consider, could it very possibly be That instead of this being understood as an isolated story, that we're actually getting to see this as part of a series of connected miracles that teach us who Jesus is and how he meets everyone right where they are. Because let's zoom out from what we've gone over the last couple of weeks. And if this is your first week with us, I apologize. But we've been working our way through Mark 4 and 5. And we're gonna step back all the way to the end of Mark 4. You don't need to turn. I'm gonna take you in your minds back to Mark 4. There was a violent storm. The disciples were very scared. And they met a demon-possessed man. And he was very afraid. And there was a woman, an unclean woman, who was frightened. And then there was this little girl whose father was scared because she had died. And yet all of these are interrupted, or all of these are connected by one amazing Savior. Let me show you some of the themes that you will find throughout the 4 stories of the storm, the demon-possessed man, the unclean woman, and Jairus' daughter. It's crazy. I wish I had time to go in depth to all of them, and I don't. Divine interruptions offered identity. On the way to healing the demoniac, they were interrupted by a storm. What they find out? Jesus is Yahweh, the one who rules the winds and the waves. On their way to Jairus' house, they're interrupted by an unclean woman. And what did they find out? Jesus is the Son of Righteousness with healing in his wings that was prophesied about in the Old Testament. Fear and chaos finds peace. There's fear everywhere in these stories. The disciples feared the storm. The man feared being abandoned. The woman feared exposure. Jairus feared the worst for his daughter. And every time Jesus stepped into their fear with peace, they were all granted peace. And I was sitting here last night, and as I regularly do, and I told you, I just kind of asked Jesus, what do you want? What do you want to happen in the service? It's about you. What do you want in the sermon to be revealed about you? And here's what he said last night. I didn't have time to put in the sermon or the slides or anything, but here's what Jesus said last night. He said, you know why people fear? I meet them in their fear with 2 things. I meet them with light and presence. If we were to take a walk down a narrow pathway, in the dark is very scary. In the light, not so much. If you're to walk down that narrow pathway, even in the dark, if you were with somebody that you had confidence in, you're not so scared. And so what does Jesus do when we fear? He meets us with light because he is the light, right? And he shines the light onto the true fears in our heart. We don't need to fear. I'm with you. He gives us his presence. His light and his presence meets every one of our fears right where they are and offers peace. When it says the knees bowed in belief, the demoniac bowed before Jesus. The woman bowed her knees before Jesus. The Jairus came and bowed before Jesus. They're all bowing in belief. But here's the one thing I find so interesting. The woman, the unclean woman, she comes from behind. Jairus comes from, he's scared because she's unclean. Jairus is not scared. He is clean. He's a synagogue leader. And yet what does Jesus do to this woman? He brings her to the front so he could look at her face to face. I just absolutely love that. 2 beloved daughters were healed. Jairus' daughter. And then what does Jesus call the unclean woman after he heals her? Daughter. Like, I wonder if that changed what Jairus thought when he realized, I was so worried about my daughter, and this man, he's worried about his daughter. They both had touches. When that woman reached out and touched Jesus, she felt it in her body that she was healed. And when she reached out and touched Jesus, Jesus felt the power went out from him. And then there were messengers that received instructions. The demoniac was told, go tell everyone. And these parents were said, don't tell anyone. Because Jesus knew exactly what to say and when to say it, because he knew who needed to hear it. Which means like we see all these moments, not as historical moments, but really as holy patterns that are working today in our fears and in our lives. And so maybe you don't feel like Jairus today, that something has died, but maybe you're in the storm wondering why Jesus is asleep. He still calms storms. It's a pattern that he does. You may not be in the tombs chained up like this man, or maybe you do feel like the chains of addiction have you wrapped up. And I just want to remind you, as Chuck told us this morning, Jesus still breaks chains. It's a pattern. Maybe you're just reaching out desperate for Jesus like that woman. And I just want to remind you, healing and restoration, Jesus still does. It's his pattern. And that pattern says no matter where you are today, Jesus still speaks to you. Don't be afraid. Just believe. But I want to encourage you, when he says just believe, it wasn't to someone sitting on the sideline who's just like, my life is miserable, and he's just saying, just believe. It's not that. It's someone who brought their misery to Jesus, fell at his feet, and said, everything's falling apart. And he says, now, just believe. Keep walking with me, because the story's not over. So may I encourage you, like, even if you feel like things are getting worse than they were when you started, keep walking in belief. Because faith isn't just a feeling, it's a movement. Faith is choosing to walk with Jesus when the answers don't come, when the delay doesn't make sense, and after you receive the news you didn't want. Keep believing and keep walking. And what does that look like? Well, here's what I would love to encourage you with this week. How do I take a step of faith? I would encourage you to pray honestly, even if it hurt. Don't run from Jesus. Come to him. And let him know how you feel. You're not going to hurt his feelings. Just pray honestly. I feel abandoned. Let him know it. I feel broken. Tell him. Pray honestly. Jairus didn't bring a polished prayer for his daughter. All he brought was desperation. And you could do the same. Tell him what you're afraid of, what you're hoping for, what feels dead in your life, because he already knows. And he will offer compassion. And stay near Jesus. Don't walk away. Right? The messengers were like, hey, don't bother the rabbi. And when Jesus said, keep believing, Jairus did. He just walked with Jesus, even though he knew his daughter had died. He just kept walking. For some of us, faith looks like this. I just don't necessarily know if I believe it. I'm going to show up to worship because I know I need to be in that community. I don't really feel like it. I'm going to open up the word this morning, even though I don't even know if it's going to speak to me. I'm going to open up the word. Just keep walking. And finally, celebrate what God is doing, even if it's not for you. Because here's why. There's going to be a day when we will get to celebrate with you what God is doing in your life. See, like, I've been praying for this thing. I've been praying for healing, and I didn't get it, but they did. Hey, rejoice with what God is doing in the lives of others. Jesus hasn't forgotten you. It might stretch your faith, but it'll remind you that Jesus is still working. And that's just what my encouragement is to you today. So I I purposely had everything a little bit shorter today because here's what I wanted to do last week, and we were just a little bit out of time at the end of the service. Last week we talked about a woman who reached out in faith to Jesus. It was a physical reach. Today, Jairus just was told, keep walking with me. It was an actual walk with Jesus. And I don't know, in some ways, part of me is wondering, I don't know, maybe I'm totally misinterpreting what the Spirit wants to do today. But man, during that time of worship, just knowing that the Spirit was so clearly moving in my own heart, my own life, what I would love to do is I would love to encourage us to do one of three things. You don't have to. You don't have to. And if you don't, it's okay. But I would love to encourage you to do one of three things. In just a moment, the worship team's going to come and we're going to just close by singing, Lord, I Need You Again. And I would love for you to do one of three things. One, instead of standing, turn and kneel at your chair. Just like everyone who we talked about kneeled in front of Jesus, just take a moment and physically kneel at your chair. Or two, find someone and reach out, put your arm on them, literally put your arm on them and say, I want to pray for you. And take their need to Jesus. Like, I have faith that Jesus can do something in your life, and pray over them. Or three, I would love to encourage you to walk with Jesus, maybe to the altar up here at the front, maybe to the side where you are, but instead of just staying right where you are, actually just take a little walk. And here's what I'm doing. Like, I'm thinking, like, Jesus doesn't want us to just sit on the sideline and say, I know he can. He's wanting us to make a move towards him. And I think that's why earlier it was like, there's this invitation, like, I'm here, come. You don't have to. I know it's kind of strange for some people, but man, I would love to invite you to turn and kneel at your seat, to find someone and put an arm on them and say, I want to pray for you. Or to make your way up to an altar or to the side and just pray to Jesus. You know, you could stand and just sing with the worship team. That's completely fine. But I would love for this church to say, hey, we're not just gonna say we believe, we're gonna show. We're gonna show. Because faith isn't a feeling, it's a movement. So could we move? Would you pray with me? Worship team, you can make your way up. And then I'm gonna pray with you and then give you a chance to respond however the Lord would want.